When the HOA decided to drain the natural spring that had flowed on my land for generations, citing flood concerns, they had no idea they were setting off nature's perfect payback, as their pristine lawns transformed into muddy swamps and luxury kitchens began to flood with the very water they tried to control. I uncovered a level of corruption far deeper than anyone had imagined. "They can't just take your water," my wife Sarah shouted, slamming the HOA's official notice onto our kitchen table. I picked it up with trembling hands, reading the words that would upend our quiet life. The spring that had gently bubbled through our family's property for over a century was now being labeled a flood hazard by the Cascade Heights HOA. Victoria Reed, the HOA president, had benign the spring since she moved in just 6 months earlier. On her first walk through the neighborhood, she had dismissed it as an eyesore. "That muddy puddle is dragging down property values," she had sneered, clearly uninterested in the fact that it provided fresh water for local wildlife and naturally cooled our part of the neighborhood during blazing summers. The notice gave me 30 days to eliminate the spring or face a $500 daily fine. I felt nauseous. This wasn't just water. This was my grandfather's legacy. He had built stone walkways around the spring, planted willow trees that now towered 40 feet high, and taught me to skip rocks across its surface when I was just a boy. 2 days later, I showed up at an emergency home meeting with photographs of the spring through the seasons and a petition signed by 12 neighbors who appreciated it. Victoria sat at the head of the table like a monarch, surrounded by her loyal board members. Even Martha, my neighbor who used to borrow sugar from me, now sat beside her, avoiding eye contact. "The spring poses a serious risk to our community's structural integrity," Victoria announced, brandishing a thick report. "This geological survey shows potential flooding that could cost millions in damage." I stood up, my legs unsteady but my voice firm. "That spring has existed long before these houses were ever built. It's never caused a single flood." "Times change, water tables shift," Victoria said smoothly. "We can't prioritize nostalgia over the safety of our children." "What children?" I asked. "The closest house with kids is 3 blocks away." The room murmured with unease. A few neighbors nodded at my words, but others exchanged nervous glances, whispering about mortgages and rising insurance premiums. Then Martha spoke up. "I've noticed more mosquitoes lately. Standing water spreads disease." She still wouldn't look me in the eye. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about flooding. Victoria wanted my land value to tank so her developer friend could buy it cheap. I'd overheard her at a neighborhood barbecue talking about unlocking development potential in the area. "I want to see that geological report," I said. "Who conducted it? When were they on my land?" Victoria's smile tightened. "The report is confidential to protect the surveyor from harassment." "That's not how property assessments work," chimed in Mr. Peterson, a retired lawyer who lived down the street. "The homeowner has a right to view any documents about their own land." Victoria scowled. "We're not here to debate policy." "All in favor of removing the spring?" she asked. 7 hands shot up by board members and their allies. The motion passed. As the room emptied, I caught up with Martha in the parking lot. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You used to bring your grandkids to feed the ducks at the spring." She looked around nervously. Victoria said she'd approve my home addition if I supported her. "I need that extra bedroom for when my daughter visits." My heart dropped. Victoria was trading favors for votes. Back home, I sat in a daze, wondering how to fight a system built to shut people like me out. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the sound of vehicles outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw 2 trucks near the edge of my property. Shadowy figures were hauling equipment toward the spring. Grabbing my flashlight and phone, I rushed outside in my pajamas. "Hey, this is private property." The men froze. One stepped forward. It was Marcus, the HOA's maintenance head. "Just taking some measurements," he said. "Board authorized." At 2 in the morning, without notice, Victoria emerged from the darkness, clipboard in hand. "The HOA is allowed 24-hour access for safety inspections. It's in the bylaws." "This isn't an inspection, you're setting something up." She gave a thin smile. "We're being proactive about resident safety." "Go back to bed." I stood there until they left, but I knew they'd be back. The next day, I called 3 lawyers. 2 turned me down as soon as they heard HOA dispute. The third wanted $5,000 up front just to look at the case. Frustrated, I headed to the county records office. After hours of digging, I uncovered 2 bombshells. The surveyor who authored Victoria's report was her brother Rinloa, and he'd had his license suspended 2 years ago for falsifying data. Even more shocking, I learned that Cascade Heights was built over an ancient watershed. My spring wasn't decorative, it served as a crucial pressure valve for underground water. Blocking it could lead to widespread flooding. Armed with the truth, I asked for another home meeting. Victoria refused, claiming no new evidence had been presented. So I played a different card. I built a simple website and uploaded everything: photos of the spring's century-long history, proof of the surveyor's fraud, and the real impact of sealing the spring. Then I shared the link in our neighborhood Facebook group. Within hours, the response exploded. People remembered the spring. Some questioned why the board had moved so fast. A few board members messaged me privately, saying they felt pressure to vote in favor. Victoria retaliated with cease and desist letters accusing me of defamation. But I knew the LOA truth isn't defamation, so I kept sharing. Then, a comment appeared that changed everything. Mrs. Henderson, a 60-year resident of Cascade Heights, posted, "That spring saved our neighborhood during the '78 drought. When the city water failed, we all got our drinking water from it. It's not just Seneca, it's essential." That post went viral. Residents began sharing their own memories, voicing concerns, questioning motives. The momentum had shifted, but Victoria hadn't given up. That night, I got an anonymous phone call: "Take the website down or you'll regret it." The voice was disguised, but the threat was clear. At dawn, the roar of machinery woke me. I looked outside and saw industrial pumps lined along my property's edge, their engines thundering as they siphoned water from the spring. Victoria stood nearby in designer sunglasses, overseeing the operation. Marcus barked orders to workers in safety vests. I ran outside in my pajamas, yelling, "Stop, this is illegal." Victoria turned toward me calmly. "Under Section 3 of the HOA bylaws, we are authorized to take immediate action against potential safety threats," Victoria announced, waving a stack of official-looking papers. "Judge Keller signed this emergency order just last night." In front of me, the spring that had flowed with crystal clarity for generations was being turned into a muddy wasteland. Centuries-old lily pads wilted as the water receded. A bewildered family of ducks wandered around the vanishing pond, unsure of where to go. I dialed 911, but the dispatcher told me it was a civil issue. I called animal control about the displaced wildlife, but they said they needed 48 hours notice to respond. Helpless, I stood by and watched as industrial hoses sucked the heart out of my family's legacy. Sarah stepped out beside me, holding her phone, documenting every second. "This is criminal," she said, her voice trembling with rage. Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need you to stop filming. This is HOA business. This is my land." I shot back. "And that's my spring you're destroying." By midday, it was gone. In its place lay a crater of cracked, dry mud. The nearby willows were already beginning to show signs of shock, their leaves curling in distress. Later that afternoon, Martha appeared at the fence line, planting new roses. "Sorry about your water feature," she muttered, not bothering to look up. "But at least our property values should go up now." I stared in disbelief. "You do know that spring replenished groundwater for this entire area, right?" She gave a nonchalant shrug. "Victoria said the city's water supply is more than enough." That evening, I met up with Sam, an old friend from college who now worked as a hydrologist. He reviewed old surveys and topographical maps of the neighborhood, growing more alarmed as he studied. "This is bad," he said quietly. "Really bad. That spring wasn't just for aesthetics, it was a pressure valve for the aquifer beneath this development." "What happens without it?" I asked. "The water has to go somewhere. It'll follow the path of least resistance, most likely straight into people's basements." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. If I could prove the spring's function, maybe I could force them to reverse the damage. We spent the next several days collecting data. Sam set up monitoring stations around the neighborhood to track moisture levels and rising groundwater pressure. The numbers were frightening. When I tried to present this evidence at the next home meeting, Victoria had already changed the rules. Only board members can submit items to the agenda now, she announced, with a smug smile. Frustrated, I took everything public. A local news outlet picked up the story. Historic spring destroyed by HOA. Reporters interviewed Mrs. Henderson, who told them how the spring had sustained the community during the 1978 drought. Environmental groups began speaking out. Public outrage grew. Victoria fought back. She hired a PR firm to paint me as a bitter homeowner spreading lies. Her team issued glossy statements about upgrading infrastructure and protecting the community. Things escalated quickly. She filed a defamation lawsuit against me. I countered with one for property damage. Legal bills piled up on both sides. Then came the first flood. The Johnsons, 6 houses down, woke up to 3 inches of water in their finished basement. Their insurance classified it as groundwater intrusion and refused to cover the damage. 2 days later, the Gark as reported water seeping up through the floor. Then the Parkinsons. Then Martha. I watched from my window as Martha frantically scooped water from her basement. Her once beloved rose garden now drowned in a soggy mess. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt heartbroken. All of it could have been avoided. Suddenly, home meetings were being held weekly. Residents demanded answers. Victoria kept brushing it off. These are isolated cases, she claimed. Old plumbing, poor drainage. It's unrelated to the spring. But Sam's data told another story. The aquifer without its natural releasee was under immense pressure, and it was finding every weak spot to escape through. I posted the data to our neighborhood Facebook group. The response was overwhelming. My sump pump won't shut off. There's a spring bubbling up in my backyard. My contractor says this could cost $50,000 to repair. Property values tanked. For sale signs popped up overnight. 3 houses were listed in just 1 week. The news crews came back, this time with headlines like, HOA's costly decision turns community into disaster zone. Desperate, Victoria tried to shift blamia to the city, the weather, even climate change. She even suggested I had somehow sabotaged the neighborhood. But the real bombshell came from Mr. Peterson. The retired attorney had been quietly doing his own research. Follow the money, he told me one afternoon over coffee. It turned out Victoria's brother-in-law, yes, the same guy behind the phony geological report, owned a drainage company. And not just any company. He had been awarded a $2 million contract to buy Victoria herself to manage water mitigation in Cascade Heights. The very firm that drained my spring was now being paid to fix the flooding it had caused. I filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. Investigators arrived days later. They subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, questioned board members, and documented the damage overtaking the neighborhood. Victoria tried to resign quietly, but the residents demanded a public reckoning. The school auditorium was packed. Homeowners waved bills and photos of ruined basements. When Victoria approached the microphone, the crowd erupted in boos. She tried to explain, blaming unexpected outcomes and insisting she had acted in good faith. No one was convinced. And then I played my final card. Sarah had never stopped recording the morning they drained the spring. In the background of one of Sarah's videos, almost lost beneath the noise, Victoria's voice could be faintly heard telling Marcus, "Once property values dip, my developer friends will buy up the whole block. We'll all walk away millionaires." The room erupted. Outrage filled the auditorium. Shouting, gasps, and calls for her arrest echoed off the walls. Board members resigned then and there. Martha stood up, trembling, and publicly apologized. She admitted Victoria had promised her special considerations, preferential votes, landscaping approvals. She had played along. That same night, state investigators took Victoria into custody. She was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Her brother-in-law's company folded within days, the entire developer scheme collapsing like a house of cards. But the damage was already done. The neighborhood was still drowning. Insurance companies classified the flooding as a man-made disaster. Claims were denied across the board. Homeowners faced financial ruin, with no relief in sight. It wasn't until the federal government stepped in and declared the area a disaster zone that aid finally came. Engineers spent months re-establishing the natural water flow, carefully restoring the disrupted hydrology. My spring was reconstructed, but the aquifer's delicate balance would take years to stabilize again. The cost? Over $10 million, most of it covered by Victoria's seized assets and the HOA's liability insurance. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Martha now leads a newly reformed, environmentally conscious HOA. She tends to a memorial garden where the spring flows once more, teaching neighborhood children about respecting the land instead of conquering it. As for me, I've learned that revenge doesn't always come from elaborate plans. Sometimes, you just have to let nature and truth run its course. Water always finds a way, and so does justice. Then, one quiet night, a knock woke me. It was 3:27 a.m. I glanced at my phone, groggy and disoriented. Who knocks at this hour? Through the peephole, I saw Bill, my neighbor, soaked to the bone and panic-stricken. "It's everywhere," he gasped as I opened the door. My whole basement completely flooded, 3 inches deep already. I threw on a jacket and followed him outside. Something felt wrong. Bill's house was uphill from mine. Water shouldn't be flowing in that direction. A broken bar unless of the next morning. I was at the county records office, combing through decades-old maps, my fingers smudged with dust. The clerk eyed me with curiosity as I requested one obscure document after another. Then I found data, a 1952 geological survey. It confirmed what I had suspected. Cascade Heights sat atop a web of natural underground water channels. My spring hadn't just been a feature, it was a critical pressure release point, part of a complex hydrological system that kept the groundwater stable. Victoria hadn't just removed a water source, she'd corked a pressure cooker. I called Sam. "You're sitting on a water bomb," he confirmed, reviewing the survey. "That spring was a relief valve. Block it, and water finds another way out, usually through foundations." I needed more proof. Using borrowed ground-penetrating radar, I mapped the water movement under our neighborhood. The readings were terrifying. A groundwater pressure had doubled in just 2 weeks. At this rate, half the community could be underwater by spring. At the next home meeting, the crowd overflowed. Homeowners spoke of water-damaged basements, shifting floors, and cracking walls. Victoria, still clinging to power, sat calmly in her designer blazer. "These are isolated issues," she repeated smoothly, shuffling through papers. "Our drainage consultant confirmed your consultant never even inspected the site," I interrupted. I held up the geological survey for all to see. "This proves our spring was essential to the natural water management of this entire area." Martha sprang to her feet. "Victoria raised our property values by 20%, she snapped. "Why should we trust you over our successful board president?" A few nods, some murmurs. I saw the doubt flicker in people's eyes. Victoria still had some under her spell. I pressed on. "Ask yourself, why rush the project? Why hire contractors who never set foot on our land? Why ignore a system that's worked for decades?" Victoria's lips tightened. Motion to adjourn await. Bill stood up. "My insurance adjuster says the flooding is due to disrupted groundwater. They won't cover it." That struck a nerve. The room filled with nervous chatter. Victoria pounded her gavel for order, but the crowd was slipping beyond her control. Outside, Sam pulled me aside. "There's something else," he whispered. I traced the contractor Victoria hired. "It's owned by her brother-in-law. She's getting kickbacks." "Can you prove it?" "I'm working on it, but be careful. She's got deep connections." That night, I installed security cameras around my property. I didn't trust here and not anymore. At midnight, the footage showed someone in a hood tampering with my water meter. It was Marcus, the HOA's maintenance manager. He was trying to frame me. I backed up the footage to 3 separate hard drives. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was sabotage. Over the following week, the situation deteriorated fast. More homes flooded. The community pool cracked from underground pressure. Even Victoria's staunchest allies began to waver. I buried myself in legal texts, researching water rights law. The HOA had bypassed multiple state regulations. They'd needed permits for altering drainage systems, permits they never secured. Digging further, I uncovered newspaper clippings about Victoria's past. She left a previous HOA suddenly under a cloud of financial irregularities. This wasn't new, it was a pattern. Then came the knock. It was Martha, her mascara streaked, eyes red. "My roses," she whispered. "They're dying. My yard's a swamp." Victoria said this would never happen. "Did she promise you anything else?" I asked gently. Martha hesitated, then nodded. "A board seat, extra landscaping Votessa broken bar." She looked down at her ruined garden. I showed her my findings. As she read through the documents, her face changed. She looked up, furious. "She played us. She played all of us." "Will you help me stop her?" I asked. Martha stood taller. "Yes, I have emails." She promised special favors to several people for their support. Together, we built our case. More neighbors stepped forward as stories of threats, bribes, under-the-table deals. Victoria had built a web of corruption, and now it was unraveling. I submitted a formal complaint to the Department of Environmental Protection. Investigators arrived again this time, taking water samples, inspecting documents, and listening to the residents. Victoria tried to salvage her image with wine and cheese socials and staged speeches about progress, but fewer and fewer people showed up. One night, while reviewing the documents Martha had recovered from board meetings, I found it, the smoking gun, a direct payment trail of HOA funds funneled to the drainage contractor, and from there, back to a private account linked to Victoria herself. The company's payment records matched the unexplained deposits in Victoria's personal account. I had her cornered, but Victoria wasn't done fighting. The next morning, a cease and desist letter arrived in my mailbox accusing me of defamation and threatening legal action. It was clear, she was declaring war. I was ready. Later that day, during an emergency HOA board meeting in her home, nature struck back. Just as Victoria was confidently denying any connection between the spring drainage and neighborhood flooding, a sharp crack echoed beneath her feet. Her polished kitchen floor buckled violently and then exploded. Water burst upward, spraying toward the ceiling like a geyser. "Everyone out!" I yelled as residents screamed and scrambled to escape. Designer shoes splashed through a rising indoor lake. Victoria stood frozen, staring in disbelief as her granite countertops cracked apart. "This is impossible," she kept whispering. But I knew better. The underground aquifer had finally reached its breaking point right beneath the very person who had disrupted it. Outside, stunned neighbors gathered in clusters. Martha clutched her now-soaked meeting notes, the ink smudged but still legibly evidence. Minutes later, news vans pulled up, Channel 7's logo gleaming under flashing lights. Someone had tipped them off. "Is it true the HOA president's house just flooded?" a reporter asked, microphone thrust into my face. Before I could respond, Victoria burst out the front door, dripping and disheveled. "This is sabotage," she shrieked, pointing at me. "He did this." The camera swung between us. I remained calm. "I've been warning about this for weeks. Nature doesn't follow HOA rules." That's when Harold, the HOA treasurer, stepped forward. He had remained quiet during the chaos, but now, his hands trembled as he held up a folder. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said. "These are the real financial records. Victoria's been skimming HOA funds." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria lunged for the documents, but Harold held firm. Camera flashes lit a moment like lightning. "Show us page 7, I urged. Harold opened to the right page payments made to VR Consulting, Victoria's shell company. The amounts matched exactly with those paid to the drainage contractor. "This is a setup," Victoria screamed. But the truth was already gushing out both from her home and from the pages of her financial deceit. That afternoon, state investigators arrived en masse. They'd received my formal complaint days earlier, but the flood had forced their hand. Now, they combed through the neighborhood, collecting water samples, inspecting infrastructure, and interviewing residents. Martha became our star witness. She promised me preferential treatment. She told investigators, said my property value would double if I supported her plan. One by one, neighbors came forward. Promises of reduced fees, committee appointments, expedited approvals. Victoria had built an empire of corruption, trading favors for silence. Insurance companies sent their own teams. When they found documented negligence by the HOA, they denied flood claims outright. Homeowners faced financial ruin. We trusted her, Bill said, standing in his water-damaged basement. Now we're losing everything. I organized a town meeting in the school gym in neutral territory. The community needed both answers and hope. We can fix this, I told them, laying out a detailed restoration plan. But first, we must remove corrupt leadership and recover what was stolen. That night, Victoria was caught on a security camera loading boxes into her car. I called the sheriff. They intercepted her at the county line. In her trunk, whole laptops, shredded documents, and hard drives. Her arrest made headlines. HOA president caught fleeing in flood scandal. Her mugshot said it all. A mud-splattered designer outfit, wild hair, and hollow eyes. A far cry from the poised leader who once ruled our boardroom. Under interrogation, she cracked. The full scope of her crimes came to light. Years of embezzlement across multiple HOAs. She had targeted communities rich in natural resources, then drained them literally for profit. The trial moved swiftly. I testified about the geological surveys, the illegal drainage system, and the tampered water meter. Martha spoke of bribery and manipulation. Harold detailed the financial fraud. Victoria's defense tried to argue she acted in the community's best interest, but the prosecution, led by Sarah Chin, dismantled every excuse. Then came the clincher. Security footage showing Victoria counting cash with her contractor. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 15 years for fraud, environmental violations, and conspiracy. Her assets were seized to fund the restoration of Cascade Heights. But legal victories couldn't immediately fix flooded basements. Engineers worked day and night to restore the neighborhood's water system. The spring required careful reopening too quickly, and it could trigger new damage. Insurance battles dragged on. Some residents, exhausted and bankrupt, sold their homes at massive losses. Others banded together and filed a class action lawsuit against Victoria and her associates. Throughout it all, I documented everything. Local universities requested my research for case studies on environmental justice. The story went viral, David vs. Goliath. And then, Martha surprised us all. I helped create this mess, she said at a community meeting. Now I want to help fix it. She volunteered to lead the interim HOA board. Together, we rewrote the bylaws. Environmental impact assessments required for all projects. Financial transparency made mandatory. No more rushed developments. No more backroom deals. Contractors return needed, this time under real supervision. Proper drainage systems were installed. The spring was carefully restored. By early spring, cautious optimism returned. Yards began to dry, foundations were repaired, and the community had learned something valuable. Blind trust is dangerous, but collective action can repair even the worst damage. Children gathered near my spring, now flowing freely again. Their laughter echoed through the air, a reminder of why we fought it, to protect what matters, for the generations who will inherit it. Victoria's empire had collapsed like her waterlogged mansion, but from the ruins, our neighborhood had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Weeks later, in the county courthouse, I took my seat as water dripped from a leak in the ceiling, another quiet reminder of everything we'd endured. At the defendant's table, Victoria sat slouched and disheveled. Her power suit was wrinkled, her hair unkempt. The polished Phi-tilde Section 8 had crumbled completely. "The state calls its next witness," announced the prosecutor. Martha rose from her seat, clutching damp documents in both hands. "Mrs. Henderson," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the court what happened to your home after the spring was drained." Her voice trembled. 3 feet of water, she began. Water in my basement, my wedding photos, my children's baby albums, all destroyed. Martha's voice cracked as she recounted the aftermath. The mold grew so fast, a broken bar. She paused, struggling to hold back tears. Victoria's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection. Emotional manipulation." The judge didn't flinch. "Your client manipulated an entire neighborhood," he said coolly. "Overruled." "Continue, Mrs. Henderson." Martha gathered herself. "Victoria promised me a board seat if I supported her plan. She told me property values would skyrocket if we got rid of that spring. I trusted her." The prosecutor brought up a slide on the courtroom screen. Bank records showing monthly payments from Cascade Drainage Solutions to an offshore account tied to Miss Reed. "Can you explain these payments?" Miss Reed? Victoria said nothing, but her face had gone pale. During the next recess, I overheard two jurors whispering, "Can you believe she thought she'd get away with this?" One muttered. The afternoon session was even more damning. The state's geological expert took the stand. She ignored 3 separate warnings. He testified. We told her removing the spring could destabilize the entire aquifer. And her response? The prosecutor asked. She stood and I quote, I don't pay you for opinions. The next witness was Victoria's own brother-in-law, owner of Cascade Drainage Solutions. He'd taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. She came to me with a scheme, he admitted, said we'd split the profits a 60-40, the HOA would pay inflated prices, and I'd kick back the rest. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Then came the surveillance footage of Victoria accepting a briefcase full of cash in a dimly lit parking garage. Her composure finally cracked during cross-examination. "You're all jealous," she screamed. "I made Cascade Heights prestigious. That spring was dragging down property values. I did what needed to be done. By destroying people's homes?" I couldn't help but say aloud. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." Victoria turned on me. "This is all your fault. If you just complied with the HOA rules you created to line your own pockets." The prosecutor cut in, voice steady. Next came the forensic accountant. He presented charts, wire transfers, and invoices over $800,000 embezzled. She masked the theft as emergency maintenance and flood prevention, he explained. The jury was visibly shaken. When court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed the steps. "How does it feel to see justice served?" one asked me. "This was never about revenge," I said. "It's about accountability. Our community trusted Hira and she betrayed that trust." That evening, emergency crews rushed to pump water from yet another flooded basement. The local news ran the headline, "HOA President's Greed Triggers Environmental Catastrophe." My phone buzzed non-stop. Some neighbors thanked me, others blamed me. The community was divided, but at least now, no one was in the dark. The final blow came the next day, when prosecutors revealed emails showing Victoria had planned the entire scheme before anyone had even complained about the spring. Target the water feature first, she'd written to her brother-in-law. Create a problem, then offer our solution. The jury needed only 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the foreman announced. Victoria slumped in her chair as the judge listed her crimes: fraud, embezzlement, environmental violations, racketeering. "Miss Reed," the judge said, "you abused your position of trust for personal gain and caused irreversible harm. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison and full restitution to your victims." As the bailiffs led her away, she turned to me one last time. "I hope you're happy." "I'm not," I replied, "but I'm relieved the truth finally came out." Outside, news vans lined the streets. Recovery wouldn't be quick or easy. Insurance companies had denied most claims, citing the man-made nature of the flooding. Many families faced financial ruin. Later that week, Marcusa, the maintenance manager who'd helped drain my spring, approached me, guilt on his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Victoria threatened to fire me if I didn't help. My son needs medical care. I couldn't lose my insurance." I looked at him. I understood, even if I couldn't forgive him completely. "What matters now is helping this community heal," I said. That night, I stood at my window watching emergency pumps work overtime in neighbors' yards. Where lush lawns had once stood, water now pooled in stagnant patches. The absence of the spring had set off a chain reaction no one could have predicted. Property values plummeted by 40% overnight. Several families had already moved away, unable to afford repairs. Then my phone rang. It was Sama, my hydrologist friend. "I've been analyzing the water table data," he said. "We have to restore the spring as soon. If not, the aquifer could collapse entirely within 6 months. How bad would that be?" "It wouldn't just affect Cascade Heights," he warned. 3 surrounding neighborhoods would be impacted too. The weight of it all hit me. Victoria had created this mess, but it was up to us to fix it. Outside, rain began to fall, soaking the broken land we once tried to control. Nature was reclaiming its place, and the price of our arrogance was higher than we'd ever imagined. 6 months later, I stood knee-deep in mud, directing the restoration crew. "Careful with that pipe," I called. As workers maneuvered equipment around the spring site, the morning air buzzed with activity at excavators, engineers, volunteers, everyone working to undo the damage Victoria left behind. Martha arrived in rubber boots, 2 coffees in hand. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, handing me a cup, "but I miss your spring." Her transformation from Victoria's staunchest ally to a leading voice for environmental reform had surprised us all, including herself. "Readings are looking better," Sam said, scanning his tablet. "Pressure's stabilizing, but we're not out of danger yet." This wasn't just about reviving my spring, it was about saving our entire neighborhood. Federal disaster relief, paired with the assets seized from Victoria, barely covered the restoration costs. The rest came from us, the community. Elderly couples made sandwiches for volunteers. Teenagers hauled debris in the heat. Everyone gave what they could. 3 weeks in, our first major setback struck. A buried utility linear illegally installed by Victoria without permits ruptured. The site flooded, halting all progress. Contaminated soil and damaged equipment threatened to undo everything. "She's still causing problems even from prison," one frustrated resident said at an emergency meeting. "No," I corrected. "This isn't Victoria. This is what happens when corners are cut. We're doing it right even if it takes longer." Then, we made an astonishing discovery. While excavating near the spring bed, we unearthed a network of ancient stone channels. Dr. Sarah Clearwater, our indigenous consultant, was stunned. "Your spring wasn't ornamental," she told the crowd gathered to see it. "It was part of a traditional native water management system centuries old. This land knew how to balance itself long before we interfered." Everything changed after that. Instead of simply restoring the spring, we integrated indigenous knowledge with modern engineering. Our project became a model for sustainable design, drawing interest from environmental groups across the country. Local schools began field trips to learn about water ecology. Martha started a community garden using responsible irrigation practices. Even former skeptics began to understand. The spring wasn't just water, it was life. When the restored spring finally flowed again, hundreds gathered. Children splashed in shallow pools. Grown-ups wiped away tears. The soft, familiar sound of running water felt like music. "I want to thank everyone who believed in this," I told the crowd, especially those who challenged it, listened, and changed. Martha stepped forward as the new HOA president. "Today, we adopt new bylaws," she announced. "From now on, any environmental decision requires community input and expert consultation." Cascade Heights transformed. Property values rebounded as our story attracted eco-conscious buyers. We were no longer infamous for HOA drama, we were celebrated for leading the way in suburban ecology. 6 months after restoration, we hosted our first spring festival. Local artists painted murals of the aquifer system. Restaurants served dishes using herbs from Martha's garden. Children played near the spring, their laughter echoing through the trees. Victoria's former mansion, seized by the state, was repurposed as the Cascade Heights Environmental Education Center. Its walls now held exhibits chronicling the disaster and the hard lessons we learned. One featured her fake geological reports and damning emails, a sobering reminder of what unchecked power can do. I often led tours there. "This spring taught us everything is connected," I would explain. "When we try to dominate nature instead of understanding it, we set disasters in motion." Not everything healed perfectly. Some families never returned their trust in the community broken. Others still struggled financially. But we learned to stand together. We questioned authority. We respected the land. 1 year after restoration, the spring received official protection status. No future HOA could ever tamper with it again without a full environmental review. We built legal safeguards to prevent another Victoria. The most gratifying moment came during a surprise inspection. State officials confirmed, the aquifer had fully stabilized. "You turned a crisis into a blueprint for stewardship," the lead inspector said. Martha and I often sat by the spring in the evenings, watching fireflies drift over the water. "Remember when I called it a gaudy water feature?" She laughed. "We all were fools," I'd reply. "We let someone convince us that nature was the enemy." The spring had become more than a stream. It was a symbol of resilience and redemption. Families picnicked along its banks. Wedding photographers used it as a backdrop. New residents arrived knowing its story, ready to protect it. Today, children learn to identify native plants in the educational garden. Solar panels power the community center. Rain barrels collect water for irrigation. We have become the change we once needed. Victoria served her sentence and disappeared from public life. Last I heard, she was living quietly in another state. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly understood the damage she caused, not just to the land, but to the trust of an entire community. But the spring still flows clear and strong. Its gentle current reminds us of nature's quiet persistence. Its music hums a lesson we'll never forget: respect, balance, vigilance. What Victoria tried to destroy became the heart of something new, a reborn community grounded in cooperation, understanding, and harmony.